Today I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful and delicious loaf of bread in a 13-inch Pullman pan without the lid. I recently shared my recipe for a 13-inch Pullman with a lid, but you can also use the same pan without the lid for very different results. I love having the option of using the Pullman pan with a lid or without a lid. It turns out very differently. I like both ways, so try both and let me know which one you like better. I'm using the same recipe as when I made this loaf with the lid. So I've included the recipe, but I made it much shorter and quicker to go through. So if you want a more detailed explanation of this recipe or want to know how to make this loaf with the lid, be sure to see that video. I'll link it above. This is a really simple recipe to throw together. There's only 7 ingredients and it turns out great. So I'm going to start with 1 cup of lukewarm water. So I'm going to go ahead and put this 1 cup of lukewarm water into the bowl of my stand mixer. I'm using my Zacme stand mixer today. You can use any stand mixer. You can make this by hand too if you want to. Now after the water, now it's time for some milk. I'm going to use 3/4 of a cup of warm milk. So 3/4 of a cup right on into the stand mixing bowl. Now it's time for some butter. This is 4 tablespoons or 1/2 stick of melted butter. You can also use 4 tablespoons of any kind of oil that you'd want to use. So I'm putting 4 tablespoons of melted butter right on into my mixing bowl. And next we want a little bit of sugar. So I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of this white granulated sugar. And the next ingredient we want for this bread is the yeast. So for this recipe, you want 2½ teaspoons of yeast. Now, like I said, this is instant yeast. But you can also use active dry yeast, rapid rise. They'll all work just about the same in this recipe. So 2½ teaspoons right on in there with the other ingredients. Now it's time for the flour. Now I love to use bread flour in my breads, but you can also use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is a lot cheaper these days, so I understand if you want to use that. So I'm going to use 5 cups of this bread flour. I'm going to put it right on into this mixing bowl. Now, in the description, I'm going to leave you the printable recipe that'll also be on my website, robinonthefarm.com. I'm going to leave you this recipe in cups and spoons like I'm making it today, and I'll also leave you this recipe in grams. All right, 5 cups right on into my mixing bowl. And it's already time to add our very last ingredient for this bread recipe. We need some salt. So 1½ teaspoons right on into your bowl with all your other ingredients. Now that we have all of our ingredients in the mixing bowl, it's time to let this get kneading. So I'm going to turn this on to speed 1. I'm going to give it 1 minute just to mix up my ingredients, and then I'm going to just check to make sure I don't need to add a little bit more flour if it's too wet, or a little bit more water or milk if it's a little bit too dry. But I'll show you exactly what it should look like in just about a minute. I've given my mixer 1 minute to mix up the ingredients, and this is what the ball of dough is looking like. This is looking perfect. I don't feel like I need to add any more water or flour, so now I'm going to turn this up to speed 2 or a medium-low speed for this to knead. And I'm going to let this knead for 8 minutes. Oh, look at this gorgeous dough. Isn't it so pretty? It's soft, it's tacky, but not too sticky. It's not sticking to my hands. It does a little bit when you touch it, and that is exactly what you want. And now it's time to let this dough rise. This can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, just depending on the temperature of your home, your altitude. What you're looking for is for your dough to get fluffy, expanded, not necessarily doubled in size, but that is something good to look for. So I'm gonna let this go for about an hour, and then I'll show you exactly what mine looks like, and it'll be time to shape it into a loaf. So my dough has been rising for about 45 minutes, and it's looking really good. So once it's risen, you just turn it out from the loaf pan. I'm going to take this dough and I'm just going to press it out really well. And as I press it out, I try to make it about as wide as my loaf pan is long. So this is a 13-inch Pullman loaf pan without the lid. Okay, so you press it out, get all those little air bubbles out of it, and then I'm just gonna do the head down, shoulders in method. Pull the head down like this, pull in the shoulders or the sides. Then I'm just gonna press it out with the palms of my hand really well. And now I'm going to continue just to roll it into a nice tight log. This will give you really good texture to your bread, give you nice surface tension, make you have a really pretty loaf of bread. Now I just turn it over and I press those seams together and the ends, just pinch all of that together, kind of pat it out. It'll keep your loaf from bursting as it bakes. Okay, this is looking great. This is a little bit harder of a loaf to manage getting into the loaf pan just because it's longer, a little bit awkward to handle. Okay, so here is my loaf pan. I'm just gonna grab this and put that right on in there. Now remember, this is the USA pan that has the silicone lining, so nothing is gonna stick in this pan. So I didn't spray it, oil it, grease it. I didn't do anything, and this loaf is gonna just slide right on out when it's done baking. But if you have a different kind of Pullman pan, you may need to grease it up. Okay, this looks great. Now I'm just gonna let this sit here on my countertop and let it rise. I'm gonna check on mine in about 25 to 30 minutes. It might need a little bit more time, but I'm gonna check on it then. I don't want my bread to over-rise. That can give you an off texture. It can actually make your bread too soft, and when you slice it, it can kind of crumble apart. So I'll show you exactly what this should look like when it's time to put it in the oven. My dough has been rising in this Pullman loaf pan for 35 minutes, and this is looking great. You can see it hasn't quite reached the top of this loaf pan, but this is a 4-inch loaf pan. So this is a really tall loaf of bread. It rises up instead of out. So this is exactly what I want it to look like. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this in the oven and let it bake for 35 minutes. This looks really pretty. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it out from this loaf pan. Oh, look how well it slid out of this loaf pan. These USA pans really are nice. They have that silicone lining, plus they also have these little ridges inside, and supposedly that helps your bread to release too. Okay, wow, what a huge, beautiful loaf of bread. Look at that. I covered this loaf with a tea towel. I let it cool for a little bit, and now I'm ready to slice into it. Look at this beautiful texture on this gorgeous loaf of bread. This is a nice, light, airy, soft, and fluffy loaf of bread. And when you compare this one made without the lid to the one made with the lid, this one is definitely softer and fluffier just because it's been allowed to rise. I love the domed, old-fashioned top. The one made with the lid is a square loaf. It's a little bit more dense just because it's compacted into that loaf pan. I really enjoy both of these loaves. I like having the option to make it one way and then make it another way the next time. So you can get these with the lid or without a lid. They're available both ways, but really the smart thing to do is to get it with the lid, and then you can just take the lid off. Sometimes you can use the lid, sometimes you don't use the lid. Best of both worlds right there. These are our handmade beeswax bread bags that I love to store my homemade breads and baked goods in. These are 11.5 by 17 inches long, so this 13-inch Pullman loaf fits perfectly inside. I'm going to leave the link below for these handmade beeswax bread bags and the printable recipe for this 13-inch Pullman loaf, made with and without a lid. Thanks so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I'll see y'all next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each need, ground wheat fresh, sowing her seed. The smell of fresh bread rises in the air. Simple life without a care.